So last time we had started to talk about after you brainstorm, how do you narrow down the list, just to catch us up, because that was a whole decade ago what we were talking about, and a lot has happened. So we've done the overview of RBA, population and performance measures. We have talked a little bit why this framework can be useful and how to use it. We started with the homework of and the examples in the practice of brainstorming how much, how well, and is anyone better off on the performance measure side. And then we started to look at how do you refine that list into something that's manageable, right? Because that's also the promise of RBA, is to create some efficiencies out of the hundreds of data points you could be and might be collecting. How do you narrow it down so it's actually a useful tool for conversation and improvement? And the request was made to go sort of from theory into some practice on that proposed process, right? So it's one thing to read about and another thing to do it. So today we'll go through that exercise, which was a two-part culling process, is what I call it. One is just sort of based on votes and emotions, and the other one is against some criteria. So we'll walk through that process today. But and then if we have time, we'll pivot to what would have been this topic for this week, which is the turn the curve exercise, which is the conversational frame for taking the data and having a meaningful conversation about it that moves you from talk to action and helps streamline not just the data that you're looking at, but also how do you streamline the strategies that you're implementing to make improvement. But before we do that, there was homework. And so I guess we need to just check in and say, from the homework, there was reading and trying hard isn't good enough, and also continuing to refine your brainstorm performance measures. So I guess I'll start with, how many of you got to do that? You do, if you have your picture on, you can do a show of hands. There's a marginal, there's a yes and a marginal. All right, so we've got a mixed bag. And for those of you who don't have faces, can you maybe say where your status is on that homework?
I am still myself catching up on the previous session, so I wouldn't say I'm very far into that right now.
Okay, thank you.
I would say I'm partially through it. We've been having some conversations here at the Agency of Ag, but not fully through the homework.
Okay. Caitlin or Jamie?
I would say very similar to Mary, except probably not even as far, because hers are all written down and mine are less written down.
A lot goes on in our heads before we get it to paper. Give yourself credit for that part. And Jamie?
I'm still catching up on the last session, so I'm a little bit behind.
Okay, so so the good news about getting caught up is we're gonna walk through those sheets again in that process in sort of a practical way. So that's the good news. The other piece of that homework was asking if anybody had moved through their brainstorm list, that we would use that as an example today. And I didn't hear from anybody. I do have a backup plan, but if anybody wants to, is anybody to the point where they have a brainstorm list that they want to walk through this culling process? You get your work done for free from a whole group of smart people. All right. That's fine. All right, so with that, we'll use an example that Beth is providing. But before we do that, let's just start with, based on wherever you are in this process, what questions might you have right now based on what you've read or you've been trying to do? Or is there anything you'd like to group source getting through some of the stumbling pieces of implementing this? I gotta believe there's some questions.
So I worked with Catherine and Lindsay, another colleague of ours, and we tried to brainstorm and do some culling, and I'm still struggling on the is anyone better off part of the performance measures. My brain, I can wrap around numbers of how much we did and percentages of how well we did it, but I'm still struggling on the how do you get numbers and percentages in order to answer the question of is anyone better off?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. So sometimes when there's a struggle with that, there's a couple things to consider. The first one is to remember that this is indeed the hardest one to hang your hat on. So sometimes we just set up blocks for ourselves because it's not as clear, and it's hard to take credit for something we actually don't have full credit for, right? Because in a complicated, messy world, there's lots of influences. So there's a certain amount of risk of saying we did that, right? As long as you say we contributed to that, that's sort of the language pivot to free up that holding back of contribution to those outcomes. So that would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is, are you clear about who your customers are? And if you're not clear, it makes it a lot harder to understand the impact of your program if you don't know who they're directed to. So making sure you're really all in alignment about who the customer is, that would be the next thing. And then the final part is, what's your theory of change? Again, we do these things, why? And if you've read, I think it's Simon Sinek, his why book is like, ask 6 times. Like you have to get down to that. Why do we do this? And keep asking yourself, why do we do that? Why do we do that? And when you get to the conclusion of all those whys, you might actually have some sense of what the impact is you are driving towards, right? And that might also help. And then the final tip that I give to folks is, as a team, when you think about the end of your day, or the end of a time with a client, or the end of a program, what makes your heart sing? Like when you know that you've rocked it, what was it that what made that feel successful to you? And that's when you start to get some threads about, again, what your theory of change is and what you're trying to achieve with or for or to the people that you serve. So those are just some ways that I sort of move around it. Sometimes it's about not looking, sometimes if you don't look directly at something and you look out of the corner of your eye, you see it in a new way. So sometimes if we charge right at it, it's hard to go at it. So these are sort of ways to poke away at it. Do you think, does that help at all?
It helps me. I guess I'm just struggling with the structure of, phrasing what you just said, using a number and a percent.
Okay. All right. So what'd you come up with? And first tell me the program that you're talking about.
So in this particular context, I was working with Catherine and Lindsay, Northwest UVM Extension Northwest Crops and Soils team. And in terms of the is anyone better off, we work with farmers, agricultural service providers, and so we just sort of lump them in terms of customers. We call them participants in our outreach. And so I think what we came up with, Catherine, you can correct me when I'm wrong, was something like the number of participants that gained a knowledge or some percentage of gain in a knowledge, in knowledge or a skill. And we were trying to look at our entire program all at once, so we didn't try to drill down into a particular project. So we tried to keep it as broad as possible.
So you're on the right track, right? So is anyone better off always comes down to, is there a change in behavior? Is there a change in condition? Is there a change in knowledge, et cetera, right? So you're on the right track. And then what happens in a complicated program, so let's say you have 17 classes or programs that you're offering in a year that each have a different subject matter. So this is where it gets a little messier than maybe the book presents, right? You just have 3 measures. Well, not really. But where you can find alignment is where you start to create some of those efficiencies. So you're on the right track in terms of that umbrella measure. The number and percent of participants who report or are observed or are tested and show an increase in knowledge, right? That knowledge is particular to each of those program offerings. So within the evaluation of each of those programs, there would be either observation or a survey or a test specific to that knowledge base. And that way you're not sort of reporting, well, they learned, you don't have to report 17 things, you aggregate it up into, we saw measurable improvement in the awareness and knowledge of that. So I think that's, you're right on the right track.
Cool, because that gets at another question that came up while we were doing this was, in a large and complicated program where you have, whatever, 17 different projects, is it better to try to drill down and do this 17 different times, or stay, really broad and try to zoom out as much as possible so that you're applicable to all of the 17 different projects within a program? Yeah.
So this is where you start to get into those Russian nesting dolls, right? And the importance of, there's somebody who's really in charge of that I'm just going to call them programs, right? So program one, you've probably got somebody who's really invested in that, they're the one offering that. And then you have another program that someone else is offering. They're really invested in the specific measures for the program that they're offering. And they need to adapt based on what the feedback they're getting back from that program, right? And then you roll that up, but everybody across all the programs is measuring, did somebody learn something? Right? And if they didn't learn something, well, then we have to change, right? But you roll up, what's the number and percentage of folks from each of those programs that learned whatever they were supposed to learn, right? And that moves up the food chain in the organization for reporting purposes and for understanding the system. Then when you're looking at across program efficiencies and impact, if you have a few that like they're not reporting learning something, then you start to look across the board and say, so what are these folks doing that you're not doing that we can learn from to make improvements, right? And that's where the conversation and looking under the hood for that data. I mean, you're lucky. In some ways you're kind of lucky when you have multiple aspects of the same program, because you can learn from each other and pick what's best, because you have these nested things that are unique and that might work. And the alternative also is the opposite of that. Sometimes you have a unique group that you're trying to serve, right? I don't know if this is there's one program amongst you that there's sort of the willing and the unwilling, right? So again, tussling out the willing and the unwilling is an important part of the analysis. As you go, well, why did this program not have as many a high success rate in terms of learning something new? Oh, it's our pool of unwilling. Well, is there something we can do to make them achieve higher marks? Maybe not, right? Depending on where your energy falls. So it's so that's again, that nesting piece becomes important. But where really the promise of RBA and all this and these complicated sessions is that you don't have, if you have 10 different programs that you're offering to the public, they aren't all off doing their own thing about measurements. There might be a tweak to the survey, a tweak to the words, but it's all aligned in terms of, again, we're trying to get at, did anyone learn anything, right? And then of course the next layer is, did they change their behavior as a result of the learning? And that's when you start looking at the window of time you have them for and your capacity for long-term measurements. That sounds to me like you got one. And that's, yay! All right, what other questions might there be?
I have a question, Kate. So in that learning, on a survey, could that be actually, is it just one question on the survey? Or to get at that learning question, might it be 3? Like might it be, did you learn something about nutrient a specific aspect of nutrient management? Like the program might you have 3 questions, 2 or 3, or obviously you don't want to have too many on the survey, but
so again, it depends on what the program is. And this is what I know I do at CNL all the time, right? We have the nonprofit management survey. We have 10 different weeks of classes with different topics. We have a survey for each one, and we're asking them, did this help, does this help you with your work? Will you apply it? Will you talk to someone at the office about it? Whatever that is. And it's very specific to each one: marketing, accounting, board work, etc. So you could have one question in general, because people come in with different learning needs. If your program design for education is very specific, we need to teach these 3 aspects of crop management or water quality. You could have 3 questions to start gauging about that. And the question then is the delivery different? Do you have different people presenting that information? Is it a different format? Is there something that you're going to learn and adjust by asking 3 questions versus 1 question? And so that's what I always go back to, is if I'm asking a question, why am I asking? Can I actually, If I merge it together, can I react, or do I need to tussle it out into more than that to react and get better? And you'll learn that over time, I think. I mean, you might start with one question and go, there's an underpinning question we have to get an answer to before we can adjust our program. And that's an indicator. Oh, I guess we should ask 2 questions.
Thank you.
Welcome. What else? All right. For those of you who have made some progress in doing the work and doing it in community, maybe it would be helpful for the folks who are having a harder time, and I don't know what's making it harder to do the work, but if you have some highlight, perhaps you could share it now about how you made it work so that you could progress on bringing this into the organization. What's a hot tip? Toot your horn. Those of you who said, yeah, I got it.
This is Nina. I was just going to say that we have, so typically what happens is there's programs running and then we try to like change things mid-program. But we had the opportunity, we've got this newish approach that we're trying to roll out, and just trying to take the time to do it now. So we kind of met with a group last week and went through the theory of change process into kind of identifying some of the strategies. And then we've got to go through the metric piece to work through it. But pulling people in to this process I'm working with has been really important. And then I work with a lot of people on this, and it's always the struggle between do we change things mid-program or do we wait till we have a new kind of release to make these changes? And that's been kind of hard to struggle with because we want to make changes, but we know that it administratively makes things really difficult. So yeah,
you have something new that you get to play with. That's great. And then again, but what you bring up is a really interesting point. Again, as you design your data collection and you start to think about that, that's an important question to answer, or to ask and answer. At what point can we implement change? To what degree can we implement change? Because that also drives how often you collect the data, the timing of the data collection and the questions you're asking or the observations you're making and the analysis you're doing. If there's no reasonable way to make a change mid-cycle, then you can wait till the end and do your evaluation. If there's a way that you can make adjustments along the way, then you're collecting data throughout the process so that you can make those adjustments. And not all adjustments are the same or have the same impact on an organization. So, when we, so for instance, again, the Center for New Leadership Nonprofit Management, we evaluate every week, and there are some things that we make changes during that 10-week course, whether it's logistics or outreach or how material is presented, things that we will warn the other presenters. Sometimes we have presenters who teach 2 sessions, so they get that feedback immediately so they can adjust in their second session. And I'll tell you what, there's something really powerful when the folks in your program see that they've been heard and that adjustment was made. The other side is also true. If you get their feedback and you don't make the change, they see that too. So if you're not going to make the change, you can say, we heard you, we just can't do it yet.
I think that could almost be a somewhere in the how well did we do it, some sort of documenting of responsiveness to your cohort, to a cohort's needs.
Yeah, and that's pretty exciting when you can actually meet those needs immediately, and everybody's a hero. It's pretty cool. All right, any other hot tips? All right. The only thing that I would add is, there's a reason why things don't get done and why they do get done, right? And it comes down to making the time and making that commitment. So if it's something that you really need to do and want to do, then putting it in the calendar. And for me, at least, my experience is if it's not on my calendar, it is not going to happen. And so that would be the very first step I would make. Reserve the room, invite the people, put it on the calendar, and then you have a better chance to do that. Honoring busy times and busy offices, the other way to make that happen is to add incremental time to meetings that already happen. So if you have a regular meeting with a group of people that you're trying to include in this, ask for 15 minutes of the meeting, or ask if people can come early or stay late for 15 minutes and start working your way through it that way, because they already are going to be there. So it's not like you're herding cats. They're already there, right? So that would be another hot tip that I would offer. All right.
So I have a question. Well, not really a question, more of a comment about the process. And so Jen and I have, you know, it's one thing to gather Jen and I relatively quickly, like to work together. But the idea of gathering our community, our board quickly is like, no, like that's going to be February before I get that, you know, brainstorming group together, or that teaching, you know, it's like I have one opportunity a month, and there's, you know, 1 or 2 months of pre-planning to get into that agenda, right? So this stuff it's just not happening in a time, like our time frames are just stretched out. That Jen and I can mobilize a lot quicker. But then that also brings up to me like the difference between what my board's responsibilities are and being staff ED kind of stuff. And like a lot of this programmatic evaluation initially is really on the staff. So how much is this like gathering the community, because that's the first thing we have to do. But then after that, we won't be having, anyway, the time cycling is, and then having the holiday. I'm not making big excuses, but like holy shit, like I haven't done anything since the last one, just like all the way everything falls together. But
I understand that. So one of the things that you might consider, and this is probably real for each of you who are working with a board, is thinking about who on your board seems most interested in your monthly or quarterly program reports. Who asks the most questions? Who seems to be like knocking on the door about how do we know we're doing a good job? And inviting a smaller circle to be the board representative in these conversations, because ultimately this work, again, part of its efficiency is if it's what you're using to discuss improvements, quality improvements, and your funding and all that, it also serves as a board report so that they know that they're doing their job in terms of monitoring your effectiveness. So inviting a handful of them who seem to be likely cheerleaders for this effort, who are interested in that program performance and that monitoring aspect of the board, would be one way to circumvent that reality of boards who show up for an hour and a half a month if you're lucky, you know, in that time frame. So you sort of build it, and then they are your cheerleaders in that meeting to say, oh my gosh, you've been represented, and we see this as an important aspect of our work here, and here's why. So bring 1 or 2 or 3 on board, and that might be easier to schedule. And again, you're hand picking them, so hopefully they are interested, and that makes a big difference too. Perfect. All right. So speak up now or forever hold your peace. Well, not forever. I'm always available for questions, but we'll move on. All right. Beth, do you want to, let me actually, if we bring up the data criteria for last time, and what we'll do is review the process again to catch everyone up and remind everyone what we did again a decade ago.
So what are you asking?
I'm going to ask you to bring up the first form, the data criteria that's in the chat.
Okay. Hang on a second. Where's the share? How do I share?
Show screen?
Yeah, I'm just making sure I'm pulling up the right one.
Okay.
Is that what you were looking for?
That's one. Yeah. So just as a reminder, this is what we reviewed last time for those of you who are here. What I like to do, especially if you have a pretty robust list of things, is to do a 2-part culling process, which is very participatory. And so the first part is, again, you brainstormed without restraint, and then you bring everybody back and say, let's just review this list, see if you've thought about anything else, or in your conversations you had some questions about how we phrased some of these, and you do some cleaning up. And then you do a first call where everybody gets to vote. You know, depending on the size of your list, you give them 3 to 5 stickers or check marks or what have you, and they get to pick what they like. I usually just say we have to select from that how well and is anyone better off, because you can do as many how much as you can keep as all of those if you want, or drop them, and you can have a different conversation about are there any we can drop. But really we're trying to move across that quadrant to the things that are most meaningful. So how well and is anyone better off? You have to have at least one, you have to vote for at least one of each. And then you move on and you sort of get your short list. And then the second call is the data criteria process, where then you move them to the data criteria sheet and you say, so some of that was emotional, some of it was what we're attached to, some of it might be forward thinking, but now let's get to what we can really do. And so if you move down a page, Beth.
So,
Yep, that's okay.
There?
So then that's perfect. And so then we start looking at the criteria, which is sort of softens the blow about the emotional part of it. And so as a reminder, the first one is communication power. And in this process, you're looking for an evaluation of high, mediums, and lows. And of course, the more highs you have in terms of meeting this criteria, the better candidate of data that would be. And so the first one is communication power. Does it appeal, and is it understandable by a broad range of audience? So again, it's used internally, it's used for your board, it's used for your stakeholders, it's used for your funders. So would all of those folks sort of understand what this means? And if they can't, can you change it a little bit so that they could understand it? And again, the one I often use is, we live in Vermont with a town meeting often asking for funding. Would you feel comfortable standing up and asking in your town for money for this based on this particular measure, that it would tell the story of what you do? The second one is proxy power. And then this gets to, again, there is no perfect measure. There is nothing that's going to get exactly what you want. And if you are if you're set on getting that perfect measure, you might as well go home now, because it's never going to happen. And that's that whole, I live with you 24/7. There are no other influences in your life thing going on, right? So does it get as close as we can get to something of central importance to our work? Again, does it reflect our theory of change given the time frame that we have with the folks that we're serving or working with and what we're trying to do? And the one of the examples that you can use here is, again, our democracy. So we vote for people to be representing us in Washington. It's as close as we're going to get to making those policies ourselves, and we hope that we're aligned well with what they're thinking and that they are listening to us and they do what we want them to do. And so it's as close as we can get to democracy. The same sort of thing happens here. And then finally, data power. Can we get this on a timely basis so that it's meaningful, and can we actually manage it and collect it and do what we need to do with it? And that gets into that time frame again. You know, if you're looking at a program that's a week or a month or a year long, those all have different lengths of time that you can make change in what you can measure. So when would you collect it? How could you collect it? Do you have enough people and resources to make that happen? So any questions on the criteria piece? Okay. So let's go back, Beth, to, can you bring up your quadrant of your sample?
Is that showing?
That's the one, it is showing, thank you. All right, so Beth created the Women Owning Woodlands program and did some brainstorming for us to play with a little bit. Beth, do you want to talk about the program and what I'm going to recommend? Maybe what we should do, if you could put in the chat the link to this document, because what we'll do is that first call process electronically will play a little bit. So if everybody has access to the chat, if you open up this document, we'll start doing some voting perhaps. But in the meantime, so that's up.
Did that come through to the chat? Does everybody see it? Yes, okay.
All right.
So I think I've talked about this program before in some of our previous sessions. I'm part of a group of partners who are working on potentially establishing a Women Owning Woodlands program in Vermont. There are similar programs in other states. This comes from the recognition that women are, an increasing number of women are owning woodlands because women are often inherit the land. They're the last landowner. And Vermont's forest planning, I can't remember the name of the document, but there's a plan to reduce fragmentation and to implement more kinds of ecologically oriented forest management practices across the state. And so women are in this unique position to help achieve those statewide goals. And at the same time, women have historically been underserved by educators and technical service providers in the forest arena. So what would it look like to do a better job serving these people, and how can we help? How can that feed into our overall ecological health? So it is, for me, it's where issues about like women's financial security intersect with the stewardship of the natural landscape, two kind of big wicked issues. So right now this group, 4 basic partnering organizations with others who have joined on, are doing a needs assessment that's involving focus groups and eventually a survey. And this is sort of getting out ahead of that, of like, if we did have a program, what would the measures of our success be? So we haven't really designed the program yet. This is starting before there is any real activity in the program.
Okay. So Beth, before we move on, can you change the setting to folks can edit this?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Let's
Thank
see.
you for that, Valerie.
So let's see. So do you know link sharing? Is that, that's not where I want it to be. Viewers of this file can see. I don't know how to set, I'm sorry that.
No. I wonder if I open it up in Google, if we can do it more easily. Let's see, anyone with, oh, here we go. Oh, I can't click on it. If you go up into that first box, anyone with a link can view, and there's a little arrow, and you could go to that arrow and change it to edit right there on the top.
Okay.
I think that will work. Okay. Thanks, Scott, for bringing that to our attention. All right. So it might help. I think we have enough time. If you would run through your how muches just quickly, and we're not going to spend too much time thinking about this, but it will give us a sense of what you're doing to understand the program a little bit. And then we'll dive into the how well and is anyone better off pieces. And so we're going to pretend that we're all part of Beth's team on this program, and we're in this space. We've brainstormed this together a couple weeks ago, and we're coming back with any new ideas or any questions we have about these measures to do that refinement process. And then we're going to vote on some of the how muches and is anyone better offs. So very quickly, Beth, just giving a reminder of what we've done and what program we're on.
Sure. So we have, so the how much is, how many people are participating, women in particular, possibly breaking out women who own their woodlands as sole owners and those who own it in partnership with others. Service providers, the numbers of service providers. I'm sorry, so sorry now because we're not in the sharing. So Emily, you're having trouble getting in?
Yeah, it said like you're sharing, your view has changed, and I clicked reload, and then it wouldn't let me look at it because I think it hasn't been shared with us.
Mine's doing
I don't know, or that old link doesn't work. I don't know.
Let's try this one.
Same thing happened to me too.
All right, so let's try a new link.
That work? Maybe?
Let's see. As we navigate our way through technology, and we need permission. Oh, Pip. Oh.
Yes, no?
Nope. All right. Let's see if I can change it into a Google document. And
okay. I'll keep talking while you're working.
While you go through it, and we'll see what we can do. And we may just have to talk it through and pretend.
So then I was counting workshops that are offered that are designed around women's learning needs and preferences. The number of workshops offered to service providers to help them do more. Resources made available both to service providers and landowners. And then the number of new organizations and individuals participating in the network. And that came from our group really seeing network building as a key part of the project. So how well do we do it? General percentage of participants who were satisfied with the content, then those who are satisfied with the delivery and format of the education. Side note, we've heard a lot from our participants about when it's offered and where it's offered is important to people being able to get as well, and how it's offered as well as the content is important to the women. Building a network, the idea of like participants who attend more than one event in a 12-month period, maybe stepping it up to more than 3 events. The percentage of service providers who report using their materials, and then looking at a change in the number of women attending events. So over time that the number of women participants should be changing based on we're doing things better. And the organizations who report benefits to their work as a result of participating in the network.
Okay. So what I would do in this part of the conversation, and Beth, it's still not being shared, so I'm going to walk through the conversation while you try to figure out the sharing. What I would do is say, so first off, are there any questions about any of these measures? Does anyone think any of these measures belong in a how much, or is anyone better off? So let's start with, are there any questions about any of these measures that you need to be able to gauge the effectiveness of it? And it's hard to read because now we have screens going on. Oh, Pip. So they all make perfect sense and you don't think any should move?
So Beth, really quickly, it looks like you're only sharing it with people in e-extension.
I think I think I just fixed that. This new link I just.
No, Stephanie's shaking her head too. I think we both.
No?
Yeah, for some reason it looks like it's just.
And
anyone that's.
And you don't work off of Google?
I'm just gonna, anyone with the link.
And I'll change that to edit.
Okay.
Let's try.
I'm sorry.
No, it's us working our way through technology. Let's see if that one works. It'll be a beautiful thing when it works. We're going to celebrate.
I'm in.
Yay, me too. Beautiful.
Okay. Learn something every day. Okay.
All right. So as you're looking at this, hopefully everybody's in who is gonna play on our team today. And so again, I would say that Beth's running this show, but I would say the percentage of organizations who report benefits, I'm not sure what benefits are, and I suspect that's a better off for organizations, right? And not so much of a how well are we doing, because it has to do with outside of our organization. So the how well, if you'll remember, is really about our work, and the better off is about other people, okay? So that would just be one observation that I would make. And I would move it. I'm gonna just move, I can't.
Go ahead.
Anybody else have a comment or question? And then again, the other one that I would say might move down is the ones who are using the materials, because that's a change in behavior. All right. So again, the clue. So in terms of attendance, that's often a how well are we doing, and in terms of their changes, that would be is anyone better off, assuming that using your material is the goal of the process. So what we're left with is we've got some satisfaction going on about the content of the education and the delivery form. that you were seeing a increase in attendance of other programs as a proxy to satisfaction, and then that they're attending more than 3. So these are a variety of ways of noting satisfaction. And then the final one would be the number of women who are attending, like the ratio of, is that the ratio of what women to men in all of your programming?
No, it was looking at just that overall, the profile of attendees
Okay.
has more gender balance.
So overall, if you have a program and you're getting more women involved, you're hoping to see an increase in women participating in all your programs.
Yes.
Okay.
Like if,
Perfect. So if you, Beth, can edit so you move those 2 that I think are down below the line, then we'll have our.
I think I did.
You did, and I'm just not seeing it.
Did not.
Maybe it's not updating on my sheet. Okay. Nope, it's not changed on the one that I'm seeing. That's interesting. All right. So then what we would do is to say, and I'm going to break it into parts this time. I would normally do it all overall, but because we're limited with this screen, what I'm going to offer is you have 2 votes in the how well did you do it, and you can put a check mark or your initials or something next to the ones that you like. So if we eliminate those other ones, we have 1. So I still have the service providers report using the materials up there. Does everyone else have that in there still? No, mine's just not updating. Okay. So go ahead and put your initials if you can next to the one that you think is the one that you would like to see, and we'll see how it pans out. And if we can see it, if everybody can see it. I'm not live, I think is the problem.
Kate, just to clarify, are we doing 1 per quadrant?
Nope, you're only in the how well we did it. So I'm breaking it up. I'm going to break this process into a step because there's so much to manage today.
I don't know. Are people?
I'm not seeing everybody's votes. Are people putting them in?
Yeah, Kate, I think you have to click on the new link that Beth sent because it created a separate document.
Okay, thank you.
I can see that people are in there, but I'm not
seeing I'm seeing it actually on your screen, but I'm not seeing it on my screen.
Okay.
That's interesting. Okay, that's kind of cool. All right, I'm just gonna watch and not try to.
Now things are coming through. Yeah.
And what I usually tell people, if you're taking hot tips on how to manage this process, one of the things I often do in a group, especially if there's a lot of groupthink in it, I will say, take a moment. I would hand this out, and I would say, you mark up the ones you want first before we do a visible voting, so as not to be swayed by your peers. Because sometimes I've seen groups where all the dots are going on one, and someone just, I'll put my dot there, because rather than have it, really what we're trying to get is multiple views so we can have a beautiful dialogue and discussion about the reservations or benefits of each of them. All right. You guys are doing great. Hey, anonymous elephant. All right, so I'm assuming that most of you have you've gotten it. So what we've got is breaking down into the participants who report satisfaction with the content and also the delivery format. And we've got a one beautiful outlier. Thank you, JC, for the changes in women and SLA. We've got 2 down in the changes in the number of women attending events. So what I would probably do in this case is I would bring all 3 over to the other document, and just for kicks, just to have a little bit of things to talk about and to look at against the criteria, do that change in the number of women attending. So you'd circle it, you'd say how many votes are there, move it over to the new list. And then we will do the same thing on the other quadrant. So Beth, is anyone better off? What I often say is, yep, it's a quadrant, but it's really just one box. So you could do number and percentage with the same measure across the board. And so one of the things I'm curious about here is, what's the difference between women and participants, I guess, in the program, as you look at these measures? Because it looks like they're the same measures, but
It's the same measure.
it's the same measure. All right. So we'll just look at one of these columns and know that it's number and percent. And Beth, if you could walk us through that.
Sorry, can I ask you a question about the previous quadrant quickly?
Yes.
I guess I'm a little bit confused about percent change in the number of women attending events, because would that be a change in behavior? Because it's like a change in engagement with managing a woodland. I guess, or you could see it as a proxy for they like the content and delivery and format, but then you're kind of already asking that, I guess.
So there's a part of me that says this is really something along the, well, no, it's a good question. And so yes, it is a gauge maybe in a change of behavior, but really what it's more of a question of is, are we contributing to women's participation and women being in this field, I suspect. And so the thing is, you look under the hood is, what is it? There's so much at play in that, right? So what can you actually control in terms of your strategies for involvement? But if you have a good baseline that says this is how many, and your target is women, I think it's an important thing to notice and to start blocking out what your strategies are for engaging women. So it's probably a little bit of both, but when we put it here, it's from the perspective of, are we doing a good job of recruiting and retaining and making impact for the women who we're serving in the field? So I think it's in the box.
And I included it as a way to not be asking a survey question. Like, it's data we already have. So instead of asking them, were you satisfied, or, you know, it was like, is it increasing? It was the way I was thinking about it. It's like data you already have, you don't have to ask anybody.
That you're just tracking it. And then you would have conversations that say, our numbers aren't going up. How else do we recruit? How do we reach these women? Right? Would be the other piece of that. Although my question would be, for these programs, is it all? It's all women. So it's
it's unclear whether how it's going to work, whether it's going to be embedded in multiple organizations, or whether it will be making sure that there's outreach to women, and that the workshop may be designed with the learning needs and preferences of women in mind, but not necessarily advertised as that. Or maybe it is, like, it's not clear yet.
But the intention behind the program is to target and serve women as a group that may be underserved.
Yes.
Okay. So I would say that's a really important measure then, right? How are we doing getting the women at the table? So that probably is an important one. And then the other interesting factor of that is this is across a lot of organizations, and it's not just one program or one coalition of folks looking at this. Are we starting to step into popular level, right? And so that's an interesting question too. And so that really, this is those nesting dolls. What's the group that's looking at this data, and what's the actual program or strategy that we're using? And if it's, so it may be, it's sort of straddling those two worlds, which is an interesting question. All right, Beth, can you go through the better offs?
Sure. So can everybody see it? Would making it bigger help?
Yes, I think it would.
Is that better? Okay, so I'm just going to do the left-hand percentage column. There's the increased knowledge about managing their woodlands, with this sort of qualifier about it having to do with the kinds of knowledge that would enable them to be in alignment with these stewardship goals. so that they would show that. There's percentage who report increased confidence about managing their woodlands, and that would include things like talking with consultants, discussing issues with co-owners, those kinds of issues. Big thing is making a decision about their woodlands. The percentage and number who make a decision about their woodlands. And then acres owned by participants where a management plan aligns with the statewide forest plan. And then I guess, so this is, I had this in, on the other side where it's acres. So it was like a reduction in the amount of something having to do with fragmentation of forest land. So that's getting to that sort of long-term goal that that's population level.
So that is a population one. So I would say it shouldn't be here unless you can rephrase it to talk specifically about your participants. So that you might.
It would be a percentage of people who make a choice that keeps their forested land intact, or something like that.
So the percentage of participants who implement this best practice of forest management, right? So for everybody note, like really that there's a real difference between that population level and that performance level. And this is where you start to have that conversation, and hopefully someone in your group is paying attention to that. All right, and I see some of you, so I see some of you are voting already, thank you. And I guess the question, is there any other questions about, is it the right phrasing? Is there a need for clarity of how it's articulated? Is it in the right box? Et cetera. Any questions about what it means? Okay. So without any questions, I'd go ahead and make sure y'all are voting.
And you only get one? Or do you get
Let's
two?
say you have 3. Oops, sorry, I just spoke.
I think I only have 5, but.
So you get to vote, you have 5 things, so you get to vote for 3 of them.
Sure.
Woo-wee. All right.
Okay, so we have.
It's so funny when this is on the screen, I want to manipulate it so much. I'm over there in that sidebar like, why can't I manipulate this?
What do you want?
All right.
Oops, what happened here? Okay.
Woo-wee. All right. Oh, this is so beautiful. Look at, there's only 3 to vote on, and we had 3 votes? No, there's 1, okay.
There's 2, I thought there were 5, maybe there were 4.
Okay. So what I would do now is, again, if this was live, I would say, okay, I'd count them up. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, and so we have 3 clear top contenders at this point based on the initial vote. Okay. So I would bring those 3 over to the other document at this point, and for the one, and what I would also offer some space for conversation, and I'm mindful that we're at 11:39. So for those of you who voted, there were a couple, was there anyone on a small vote? Okay. Number who make decisions about managing woodlands, there's 2. Does SLA or NDG want to talk about and articulate some really compelling arguments for why that one should be in there? What were you thinking when you said that's one for me? I love that one.
This is Steph. I don't know, I guess it's just language that I'm used to hearing. You know, it's making a decision. I guess it sort of aligns with the other one one of the other ones I picked, which was adopting a best practice. I guess it just makes an assumption that the decision might be a best practice, or a best practice, or that it's when you're making a decision, it also, that is another example of that person showing increased confidence. So it's just like maybe a step further than that and above it. But I don't know that I can provide any more compelling argument than that.
So it's in alignment with the other ones. And I think probably what happens is, again, in our frame, in the framework, that the time frame that we have someone, you might be able to, they might have more confidence because they have more knowledge. You might have them long enough to see them make a decision, right? And I would argue, is making a decision to fragment their forest okay, right? I mean, that's a decision. So this measure might need a little more clarification about what type of decision you're looking for. Is it just an informed decision? Or is it this decision that you like, right? So I think there's some rewording of this that might be important. And then ultimately, again, on this one, I know it's a late ad, but you have to articulate what that best practice is to be really clear, all right? Otherwise, you'll have that discussion later about what is the best practice. So the more clarity you would have, but for right now, for this process, we're gonna stick with it. And for NDG, do you have another articulation in addition to what Stephanie said that you want to add?
This is Nina. I think the biggest thing is just thinking about, providing educational services and understanding the impact of that education is using what they've learned to help guide their decision making. So that was where my thoughts, but definitely needs a little more clarity about what type of decision and how they're making it. But I think that is, to me, when we provide education, the goal is that they use it to make a decision as a land manager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's valid. So I think those are really excellent points. And so, again, if we were having a real conversation about this, I would say I would give an opportunity for people to say, oh, maybe I need to consider that. Like, should we bring this one forward to the next step too, even though only 2 folks initially put that as a top choice. So I guess I'll ask you, what's the sense? Is it okay to leave it here behind for the time being? Or do we want to bring it forward? And you can just yell out and I'll try to listen. Bring it forward? Anybody rallying for that? Okay, then we'll leave it behind for now. So I need to see, Beth, can you read them to me, because I'm typing them into our other document that we'll bring forth. And I'll just do shorthand. What's the first measure?
Percentage that demonstrate increased knowledge that aligns with the stewardship goals, and percent who report increased confidence about managing their woodlands.
Yep, and then the bottom one?
Oh, and the bottom one, who adopt a best practice.
Okay. And we have to define that best practice. And we also up above, okay, so now, thank you everybody. We're gonna move to the other document. So Beth, if you would bring back up the data criteria and collection plan. Oh, we only have 1 more minute. Golly, I hate this.
The date,
right? Hour, 15 minutes.
This one? This?
All the way down and you'll see the process. So here I've put in those first contenders based on the first call based on votes, all right? And what we would do now is we would run through it, and if you can bear with me, can everybody stay for 3 minutes? Okay. And those of you who have to leave, I'm sorry, and you'll see the recording, and we understand completely. So what we would do now is have a conversation about, what's the current status of this, just to get it out of the way? Because sometimes people get stuck on that current status, and we're gonna say, well, we could get it, we don't have it, it's not on the radar. I often code this red, yellow, and green. Green means I've got it. I could go to my desk. I could pull it out right now. Yellow might take me a little while, but I've got it in different places. Red is it's not even our radar. We're not collecting it. And this helps us come up with our data collection plan, right? And sort of gauge what we could do, but it shouldn't impact the data criteria. Then we would go through and again explain these 3 data criteria. And just go through and do a vote, a show of hands. Often I'll do like 5 for high, 3 for medium, a fist for low. And you would just go through the group, or you could have them write it down and you collect it if you're doing it remotely. So we would go through and say, okay, the percent satisfied with education. Let's not do the how well are we doing. Let's do the increased knowledge. So from a perspective of increased knowledge, Is this a good communication tool? Would people understand it? Does it get close to our theory of change at what we do and the impact on what we do? Is that a high, a medium, or a low? And I can't see all of you right now, but I'm going to scroll through your faces. Hold up 5, 3, or 0 for, actually, anyone who wants who thinks it's high, hold up your hand. And I'm going to scroll down and up and down to see you. And we're just going to do this as a proxy. So okay, I got Nina is up. I've got Scott and Catherine and Emily and Rebecca. I think Rebecca, your hand was up too. Maybe not. All right. 4, and other ones I can't see. But you get the gist of it. We would say, okay, there's, I would put it on my form. High is around 5 people. Who thinks it's a medium? Raise your hand for a medium. Beth thinks it's a medium. And Megan
Stephanie thinks it's a medium.
Who thinks it's a medium? Jen?
Stephanie, sorry.
Okay, so I've got a medium at 4. And who just doesn't think this is worth the time at all? It's got a low communication power. That people learning something is a low factor. All right, I got nobody on that one. All right, so we would do this across the board and then have a conversation. Sometimes everyone thinks it's a great one and there's no need to discuss it, right? But here there's a division about high, medium. That's not as bad of a division as some thinking high and some thinking low. So you have a conversation about it. And you say, for those of you who think that high, that increasing knowledge is really a great communication tool as we think about our funders, promoting our programs, et cetera, what makes that so? And then you just keep going through all of these. You'll start to see trends about the things that have the most highs and mediums, and then you'll also negotiate again if somebody has some insight that you hadn't thought about. Those numbers might change. And then you would break it down to, we're gonna have 3 or 4 measures by the time we're done here. Maybe 1 satisfaction measure, and 2 is anyone better off measures that we're gonna play with. And then from there, if it's not something you're currently collecting, you have to decide who, how, and when you're going to start piloting that data collection process. And that's the part of your data collection plan that you have to start to do. So let's just pretend there's been no surveys, no testing around knowledge, and knowledge ends up being high across all 3 points, and you want to do it, it doesn't exist. Somebody would have to say, I'll design the survey, we'll pilot it, I'm going to do it by the end of February, and I'm responsible, we'll get back to you with that data, all right? If it already exists, someone's going to go out and say, let me collect what we've already got, and then we have our baseline already established. So that would be the process. So we're at 11:48. Any questions about this? And I'm sorry we didn't get to go through the whole thing.
I have a question about for the group. Would you prefer to do at our next webinar, would you prefer to dig into this more and do the next step, or move into the turn the curve exercise? Do you have a sense of where you want to go?
What is the next step after this one?
So
and then how does turn the curve fit in? I guess I don't know. So
turn the curve, if it's in the book, so I would recommend reading the turn the curve. Actually, it's your homework for this session, if you can do it. There's a chapter and there's a section on that, and it is if you remember that overarching sheet, it's an exercise that takes you through looking at your data and your baseline and comparing it to where you want to go, and then strategizing in a group. How do we change? So if everything's chunking along and everything's great and it's trending the way you want, you don't actually have to strategize about any changes for improvement. I've rarely seen that in a group or a program. People are pretty driven to do better. And then you have a brainstorm question about what could we do to do better, and then you pick 1 or 2 strategies to implement and then look at the data to see. So it becomes the framework for your ongoing conversation. So again, why do we collect the data? We collect the data to look at the data, analyze the data, and brainstorm about how to get better about it. So the turn the curve is that process.
then there was another option, right? So like continuing on with this. Sorry, I don't know what I'm choosing. So
the other option is to finish this whole process up to see it through to completion. If you don't feel like sort of seeing this much gives you a good sense of how to do it. tell you what, why don't, because we're over, Beth, why don't we, I'll send out the homework assignment and we'll provide this information out, and maybe the question, a polling question about finish this process and then do turn the curve, or just move into turn the curve. You guys, you could play with it a little and see if you can implement it in your space, and maybe maybe the third option is play with it, see what happens, and come back with your specific questions about how to implement it. Might be another, like the middle ground that we could work with, and then honor still making some progress along the way. So we'll poll you and see what seems to be the consensus. How's that, Beth?
That sounds great.
Okay. All right. So we'll send out a little bit of the next assignment. We'll send out this document so you can see it, and the next reading assignment. And then when do we meet again?
It's roughly 2 weeks. It's a different time.
Okay.
Awesome.
And then this would be the other thing that I think would behoove you all. If you haven't done any of it, see how far you can get. Because as we move forward, it just gets harder to understand if you haven't even done the brainstorming piece of it or read the basics. So see if you can get a little bit more caught up, and that will make it more meaningful and more robust for everybody to participate.
Thank you, everyone, for hanging in, bearing with the technology challenges, and for asking good questions and being here.
So the next meeting is the 21st at 12:30.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Bye.